Hi there, you're listening to the Practical Stoic Podcast with your host, me, Simon Drew. If you'd like to listen to over 200 episodes that were recorded before 2020, then you can head to my Patreon site. It's patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew. We'd love to have you there, and any support is greatly appreciated. We'd love to also have you on our Facebook community, the Practical Stoic Mastermind. But for now, enjoy the show. Hi there, my name's Simon Drew, and welcome to the Practical Stoic Podcast. Now, today's episode is another one of our Practical Stoic live interviews, so if you do want to hear the interview as well as the conversation and the extra questions from my patrons, then you can just jump over to patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew. You can sign up there and grab the full interview there. But today I'm talking with Gregory B Sadler. Everybody, if you haven't heard of Greg before, then you have to go back and listen to the previous interviews that I've done with him, both one on this series of the podcast as well as in the past in the Patreon archives. But Greg is such a knowledgeable character. He's such a nice guy, always so generous with his time. And today we were discussing anger management as it pertains to Stoicism and how Stoicism can help you to deal with those emotions that maybe pop up a little bit too often in those times of anger. So really interesting conversation. And before we jump into it, I want to make sure that you know, there was some glitches with the audio on this one. So unfortunately, Greg's voice is a little bit choppy from time to time and it repeats itself a little bit. And I thought about whether I should release this episode or not, but the stuff that we talk about in here is really valuable. I hope it's helpful to you. And I thought we might as well use this as an exercise in Stoic anger management to get through the episode and try to get as much value out of it and still not getting angry over the fact that there's a few little audio glitches. So I hope that you still listen to it. I hope you get all the value out of it because Greg is such an awesome guy and has so much value to share. And you can find all of his information and his links to where you can find him online, including his amazing YouTube channel. You can find that in the show notes. So without any further ado, I present to you my interview with Gregory B. Sadler. Okay, so we have the one and only Gregory Sadler. Greg, you're always so kind and generous with your time, man, and I'm so grateful that you've really taken me under your wing in terms of coming on the show and offering your expertise. You're always happy to do it. And I'm really excited this time to have a few of my listeners as well coming along. So we've got Jeff, Eric, and Bridget, and I think there might be another one jumping in sometime soon, but we'll see. But so Greg, let's set up the conversation. Obviously we wanted to discuss anger management as it pertains to Stoicism and how Stoicism can help us with that. And I think this is an appropriate topic because when you look around the world today, it's not exactly clear that there's not an abundance of things to be angry at. There's a lot going on in the world, and there's a lot of people who are suffering, not only in say war-torn regions, but even in the West where we have pretty comparatively easy lives. It's clear to see that there's a lot to be angry at in terms of the way that governments are handling things, in terms of everything really. And so, my way of setting this conversation up is basically to hand it over to you and say, what do you see in the world today and how can Stoicism help us,
Okay. Yeah. So an easy softball question
Yeah.
to start with. Yeah. So I was talking with my colleague Tim Laban about this a bit recently because in Britain and here in the United States, there is clearly a lot of anger right now caused by the COVID pandemic and how people are handling it. And we have a very polarized political system. And use perhaps some of the demonstrations with people coming to state houses armed and things like that. And he was saying that he's not seeing that sort of thing in Britain. The mood seems to be more somber, like sadness and fear and anxiety. And I think that of it depends on the circumstances that we're placed in. So one thing that anger, just to jump into it, one thing that's characteristic of anger is that many people, as they're feeling it, they try to reassert control over things. They oftentimes feel it because not just the traditional, causes that have been noted since antiquity, being insulted or being injured in some way and wanting to respond in kind, but also when people are placed in situations where they feel like they don't have much control over their lives, and bad things could happen to them, they tend to looking for targets, anger. And you could say that there's an increased number of causes of anger, or occasions for anger, and then placing people in, say, quarantines, or in situations where even if they're quarantined, they may still get sick with a deadly disease that we still don't really know how to take care of. That'll produce anger as well. So we were already badly off, speaking in terms of just people struggling with anger and occasions for it. So we weren't doing a good job before, and now I think we're in a situation where it becomes even more likely that people will get angry, especially men, because one of the things you can say about a lot of conceptions of masculinity is that anger is an emotion that it's to feel and to express, whereas fear, pain, grief, things like that, for many men, it's considered less okay to demonstrate that. So there's a lot of displacement of other affectivities into anger. And Stoic perspective, like I said, we're badly off. The Stoics would talk in terms of not just reasons for people being angry, things that they're being angry about. They would focus on the subject, the person who's angry, and they, you can have something that it may feel that it's legitimate to get angry about, but it's not good for you to get angry. And the objection that a lot of people have at that point is, well, how can you not get angry about this? Or if I don't get angry, then I'll be able to do anything about it. But the ancient Stoics already had some answers to those things, particularly in Seneca's entire book on anger, but also in Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and in part because this is not a new problem. This is something people struggling with, and not just in Western culture too. But there's anger literature in practically every literary culture that we find. So, kind of a long-winded answer, but I mean, the bottom line is we really have a lot of people who are angry and are very often not making themselves any better off getting angry, and they're not the things they're getting angry about, there's some legitimacy to them, but also part of it is them choosing things a certain way. And so Stoicism offers us a lot of reframing devices and techniques that we can use to be less angry. It also allows us to see how anger, although it may be useful in some cases, Tim Lebell I was mentioning, are kind of a little bit Aristotelian in that respect. We're not down with the zero tolerance to anger, but probably 99% of the cases, anger is not going to be serving us.
Yeah. And, I think something that sticks out to me from your answer there is talking about this feeling of a lack of control, right? Because I think that, when the economy's going really well, when people have jobs, when, they're able to maybe spend a little bit of money and, have a good time. Like, I think that there are a lot of factors that go into a community feeling as though, yeah, things are okay. And although they might have their various angers in life, the things that annoy them maybe about family or whatever, at least things are generally moving in a good direction. But as soon as those structures start to fall a little bit and, like maybe they lose their job or, something else happens to them, all of a sudden it seems as if anger is the only place to go because so much is out of your control, right? So how do the Stoics encourage us to look at anger? How do they encourage us to begin this process of, I guess, finding that personal control?
It's good that you put it that way with like a before and after. And it's interesting because the Stoics don't usually think things that way, but there's a lot of psychometric Tories out there, and tests that talk about how people are in sort of their resting state and what their approach to be when they're stressed out. And they're quite interesting to take a look at. I mean, the Stoics didn't thematize that as such, but I think they easily could have. And what was going on when people thought that life was in their control was that they were deluded about that. From a Stoic perspective, you can think that your body is something primarily in your control because you're able to exercise, get the food you want and diet the way that you want to, and then as soon as something comes to disrupt that, if you can't go to the gym anymore and you can't get the food that you want because it's no longer available at the store, you can't even get flour in some places here in the United States. The illusion of control gets shattered, and suddenly people have to face up to the reality that was there all along, that we don't actually control our bodies or our finances or what people think of us or our rotations. So the dichotomy of control, as Stoics talk about it, sometimes it gets thrust upon us as something, and as with anything else, we haven't practiced, prepared for it, it comes as a big shock. And so then the question we can ask is, why is anger a common response to that? Because there's other common responses: depression, fear, envy, all sorts of other negative emotions. Why anger? Anger does make us feel as if we're getting some control back, although it's illusory. And so the Stoics, I think, would approach it in some different ways. One is to say, listen, you're fooling yourself in thinking that by going on Twitter railing about this, that, or by going and demonstrating in front of the Capitol, yelling at neighbors or things like that, you're actually accomplishing anything. So that's one part, but that's just the surface level. We actually have to dig deeper. Part of what you would do in anger management is, and this becomes more particularized, is you have to figure out what are you actually ticked off about, and what assumptions are you making from a perspective. What judgments do you have already? What lines of reasoning? What appearances are you buying into that produce this response? Something that makes sense, even though it doesn't really make sense. It makes sense to you at the time. So part of what has happened, and there's a lot of ways to explore this: working with a coach, journaling, actually just observe yourself as you get angry and figuring out whether the things that you're thinking are actually reasonable or on point or not. Those are all things you can do, and that's helpful. And another thing is the Stoics suggest having certain maxims. This is Seneca. Maxims ready at hand, so that when you get angry, or after already angry, you can apply them, sort of like how does he put it? Like a salve on a wound, to try to fix it. Although Seneca is much more pessimistic about being able to intervene once you're angry than, say, Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius are. So there's a whole variety of techniques that they advised us to use and talked about in their works. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. And I especially like that you're taking it in the direction as well of almost like what Seneca said when he mentioned, we should be like throwing up earthworks like the soldier before a war. Like it's about preparing for it as much as it is about actually being in it. And so, they offer these great techniques for practicing before the anger actually pops up. I want to touch on that Maxims idea as well, because it seems like, so you take the Bible, for example, and obviously people who study Christianity, they study the Bible. The idea is, if you read this enough, then you'll find little, you might call them maxims, throughout the whole book, that as you live your life, they will simply be embodied within you because you can remember them at times when you need them, right? And that's sort of the idea with these maxims that the Stoics encourage us to have, right? This idea that if you embody, if you just engross yourself in this literature, and you find the right little sayings that from time to time will pop up and help you, you can actually start to embody the attitudes that the writer is trying to help you to embody, right?
Yeah. Actually, that's a really great analogy, and I'm going to go a little bit further with it. Uh, Seneca, I think it's in letter. I want to say it's in letter 33, but I may be mistaken about it. When his buddy Aurelius is saying, "Hey, I want maxims." It's the one where Seneca says, "I shouldn't give you any maxims because really, it's all great stuff. I don't want to single out any particular quote as being, especially great. They're all great." And then he says, "Yeah, you don't want to be the kind of person who relies too much on just single isolated maxims. Anyway, Stoicism is you might call it an interlocking, self-reinforcing system." You know, the biblical writers, and there we're talking about a very long time period. At least in the wisdom literature, they had a similar point of view. If you look at the book of Proverbs, it begins by saying, okay, so here's some proverbs, and proverbs are all like little pithy quotes, but it's not actually quite so isolatable as it. I mean, you can approach it in an isolatable way. So, oh, here's a little bit here and a little bit here. That what people do on websites, where they put a bunch of quotes. But at the very beginning of the book, it says, okay, listen to these because if you're a beginner, they're going to help you out in this way. If you're a wise person, they're going to help you out this way. There's this vast interlocking, connecting way of looking at things, and I think that think about it in terms of the Jewish wisdom literature, which Christians are hopefully drawing upon. I always, when people want to talk about Christian morality, I'm always asking them about two things. I say, so what have you done with the wisdom literature? Which includes Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, Book of Wisdom, Book of Sirach, and then I say, how are you doing with this on the Mount? Because Sermon on the Mount is the stumbling block for just about anybody. Start talking about Leviticus and he's like, no, how are you doing with this really clear, hard to practice teaching? And I think we can say something quite similar about Stoicism. There are some things that the Stoics are very clear about, and they're often difficult to practice. As you said, if we've already put in some work ahead of time, we'll be better off at it. They write from the perspective of people who fail. Marcus, says this to himself. Epictetus counsels us about how often we're going to fail and have to pick ourselves back up. Seneca is very conscious of his own failings. So, there's something there to this analogy. We've got the isolated bits, and that's really great if we've got them. If we can memorize some that are helpful for them, it's probably going to vary from person to person. That's wonderful. There's some that are almost like no-brainers, how good they are. Like Aurelius's beginning of book 2, we probably should begin each morning the way that he suggests. Start morning, saying I'm going to meet with a bunch of jerks of this sort, and this sort, but I got to remind myself these certain things that they're not really get to be jerks. They're misguided, and then I won't be such a jerk myself back to them. But if we put it in larger context and it becomes part of who we are, then we've got sort of a fabric there. That, I think, is what the Stoics had in mind when they talk about living in accordance with nature. That's to live in accordance with at least partially real human nature. And the texts, they perform a function in that. They're ways in which people are talking to us from way beyond the grave in modes that we can then pick up and make our own in the present.
Yeah.
So I very much like that analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's similar. I think that you can really approach much of what we try to do in Stoicism in a similar way to the way that people would approach their journey through Christianity. It's like, hey, morning meditation. It's like your morning prayer. Remember these certain maxims, and it's gonna, because we're all aiming at the same thing here. We're trying to align with nature, whether that means living in agreements with God, living in agreements with nature, universal reason, whatever it is. We're trying to tap into our higher self, essentially.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are commonalities there. But so we know a few tips for before the anger comes on. We can remember these things. We can practice the dichotomy of control and allowing ourselves to see, okay, what is it that I actually do control in that moment when somebody flips you off in the car next to you, or somebody that annoying colleague comes into the room and starts yammering off some gibberish that you have no reason to be uh, attentive to at this time of day.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is the process? What can you offer people there, and what can Stoicism offer people in that moment where it immediately happens to you?
Where you're already starting to get a little bit angry, right? Where the
Yeah.
process is beginning. There's a number of things, but I'll just try to stick to just a few. One of them is Epictetus talks about. He says whenever there's a harsh appearance or disturbing appearance is another way of translating it. Say to that appearance, your own appearance, and not necessarily what you pretend to be. So another way of thinking about that is don't invest what you're experiencing with all sorts of assumptions and judgments that might not actually be true. So maybe your colleague comes in, and they set down their cup really loudly on desk, and a little bit spills out, and you're like, that person really wants to mess up my wonderful desk that I had it perfect at this time. No, they probably don't care about it at all. It's not to say that what they're doing is okay. They're probably still behaving in kind of a bad way, but they're not doing it to stick it to you. Or maybe they are. You don't actually know that till you probe it. And if you can do that, that'll help cut off some of the anger. Another thing is just taking pause before, or you start feeling yourself getting angry. There's this thing, I forget which Stoic philosopher it was, one that we don't know very much about, but he told one of the emperors, when you start getting angry, recite the alphabet. It could be anything. It could be counting to 10, and you could be doing deep breaths or something like that. But if you can stop the automatic process of, I've been acted in some negative way, this was wrong, I shouldn't suffer this, or I should punish this person. Stop that process from happening so automatically. You can head off anger. Another thing you can do as well is what they call depersonalization, meaning that you look at the situation as if it was happened to somebody else. Say, if this is happening to somebody else, would I consider it rational to get angry over this, or am I an exception for myself because I think it's okay for me to get ticked off about that? And there's a number of other things, but I think those three just by themselves would help a person to deal with many of those things, many of those occasions of anger, let's say.
There's kind of an idea at the end there that you're speaking about, similar to that kind of idea of the hardest thing to do is to take the advice that you would give everybody else, right? like we would look at other people who are getting angry in a situation, and we'd just be like, are you serious? Like, why would you? And often when it comes around to us, we don't act in that way. But you also said something interesting there, which is that if somebody comes and messes up something on your desk, they probably don't care that much. It's not as if they're coming in there and just trying to ruin your life. It reminds me of this quote from this Australian musician. He said, we wouldn't care so much about what other people think of us if we realized how seldom they do. And that's pretty much the best, way that I can put it. It's like people you might be annoyed by people, but they might not necessarily be going out there to annoy you. We have to have that understanding, right? That there's a certain ignorance that we all have to the way that we are affecting other people.
Yeah, that's very true. And Marcus points out again, talking to himself. So he must have had quite a few experiences like this, where he said, "Well, you're ticked off a person for doing this thing. Don't you realize how often you yourself have done exactly that sort of thing? Why aren't you angry at yourself if that's a bad thing by itself?" Rather than being bad because it's directed at you, and that can help anger as well, I think. So there's a sort of consistency, and this leads to another key point. One reason why Stoics are so down on anger is because it has such a great potential for seducing practical rationality. Even if we get away from the Stoics and we just talk about the earlier philosophers like the Plato and the Aristotelians thought there was some legitimate role for getting angry, they were still super cautious about it. They thought that Plato was called thumos, this middle part of the soul that you need in order to like resist bad things that are happening and suppress the appetite when they get a little bit too unruly. Even that has to be subordinate to reason, or it's going to start doing things with an agenda of its own, and it's going to corral reason and bring it in and turn it into subordinate. And see this all the time with people who get angry. Once they're angry, they find reasons for everything, and they start seeing all sorts of connections that are actually there. You did this one thing now, but I remember what you did last week. That was the same sort of thing. See, now there's a pattern here. And it's a dangerous way to go. So one thing we can do is remind ourselves that when we angry. I saw this in an anger management book that had nothing to do with Stoicism. It said the first thing to do to remind yourself of the first thing to remind yourself of when you get angry is that when I become angry, I become stupid. And I think that I'm not stupid. I think I'm smart.
Yeah.
And I'm making all these great associations and connections, but they're all nonsense. They're all BS.
Yeah.
I can see that if I was angry, but because I'm angry, I invest them with this almost luster, this affectivity that these are really great thoughts. And so if we know that ahead of time, we can catch that as happening. And tell ourselves, this angry reasoning that I'm having right now, this is not going to be helpful for me, and I'm not going to like what it looks like 2 hours from now.
Yeah. That's such a good point, that when you get angry, you tend to think that you're even smarter, but it's the opposite. Like I think of I'm pretty good at usually admitting that I'm pretty much an idiot most of the time, right? I'm pretty good at recognizing that I don't have all the answers, but something about when that anger pops up, it makes you feel like an intellectual. Yeah. You feel like and nature deceives you, and
I think that's part so seductive about anger is that there's the I'm like thinking on all cylinders aspect to it, and I'm totally justified as well. Anger, once it happens, starts telling you that you're totally in the right, and it feels good to be angry. It's tough on the body, but there is, like Aristotle points out, and he takes this. It's such a truism. Homer said it in Aristotle. He talked about anger, sweet as honey from the comb, right? So there is also a certain kind of pleasantness to being angry, and I think that a lot of that had to do going circling all the way back to that issue of control. Anger makes like we have more control than we do. It gives us a kind of dynamism, at least temporarily, and it makes us think that we're on top of things. And all of that is really, well, I mean, it could be the case in some cases is that we actually are doing okay, but it's rarely the case that these are actually true. But that's part of what makes anger so active. And then once we start relying on it, it's sort of like using a crutch. You should crutch when you've broken your leg and you need to sit for a while, and then you should get better and put the crutch away and start walking around. But if you use the crutch all the time, your body starts to conform itself to it, and then after a while can't walk without the crutch. And a lot of people approach doing the right thing or stand up for themselves using anger as that sort of crutch, where they think that if I don't get angry, people are going to walk all over me, or if I don't get angry, I won't be able to do the things I need to do or defend the people who I need to defend. Actually, and I've seen people doing this at the gym too. This is a total digression.
People doing this when?
At the gym, they think they get angry if they're going to push the heavy weights, and I mean, I think I can push the weights without getting myself angry. Other people do that, but then some people will rely on it as their MO. It's how they and I think that's actually big for us from a Stoic perspective. The Stoics are really attentive to how we develop habits. This goes back to the preparation. If we want to be able to handle situations, whether it's fear, anger, sadness, pain, and any of these things that we face, we need to prepare, but not just intellectually. We need to develop habits so that allows to then respond appropriately. And if we do the opposite, if we develop bad habits, it makes it much tougher for us. So I mean, I got into anger management things in part because by the time I was in my late 20s or 30s, I'd recognized after people telling me for more than a decade that I had some serious anger problems. But by then I had some real dug-in habits. It took me years and years to deracinate those, in part through using philosophy. And like Epictetus says, those scars never completely go away. You can heal it to some degree, but you always have to be a little bit careful.
Yeah, the power of habit is our biggest strength and our biggest weakness, right? It's like it can work against us in the worst ways, but it can also work for us, and that's why we talk about preparation before the anger, right? Is building the habit of being mindful, of being paying attention to the way that your body is reacting and your own emotions, right?
Yeah. And there's another help thing that comes out of that. And Epictetus talks about this quite a bit. He's got chapters specifically on anger in the discourses. He tells us that when we get into situations where we're angry, we have a tendency to say they're just one time, right? Or we're doing this one thing, and maybe we get this wrong, but it's not a big deal. And he says every time you get angry and you allow yourself to get carried away, you reinforce the habit. So if we can tell ourselves, we would with other things too, giving into the temptation to eat, more than we ought to. Go to the buffet a fifth time instead of just a fourth time, which is already probably too much. If we can tell ourselves, well, I'm not just fighting this battle for today. I'm trying to change the direction that my life is going in. That can help us out. Somebody else tells us from the outside that sort of thing when we're angry, it's probably not going to help us at all. Then we get angry at them. And what the hell are you to tell me all stay out of my business. And if we can take responsibility for ourselves and remind ourselves that so we start losing our temper and maybe saying some things in a heated way to somebody else, this is not just about today. This is about where I'm going to be tomorrow and next year. This might also be about the relationship that I'm in danger of screwing up right now, or the bad example I'm setting for in my case, the father, my kids, in losing my temper with somebody else. That'd be very powerful.
Yeah.
If we're willing to listen to it.
Yeah. Thinking about now and thinking about the future, it's important, and I only had one more question that I want to ask before we maybe bring in a couple of people here as well.
Sure.
Sometimes, so it's clear that anger has an evolutionary benefit, right? We need to feel anger at some things, but the Stoics obviously put that caveat there, saying it's never a good thing to ascend to a very angry state and to outwardly allow that to ruin everything else outside of you. But but what I think it would be okay to do is to listen to that anger, have a conversation with it, like Epictetus would encourage, and say, listen, what are you here for, and what's in my control to do about this, right? So my only question is, how do you pick your battles? How do you understand if your anger is coming from a good place or if it's something that you should just forget about it? What's the process?
So it's actually a kind of a thing, because it's particularly vicious with respect back to anger, which is where I started out. The answer is, it's never on it's never helpful. But then you're right, as you start making more and more progress, the better off you are, the more times anger response might not be completely off base, right? And so you could think about, come back to this situation that we're in. There are things that people are angry about, having to do with COVID-19 and government responses to it, and the bad situation that many people were in before that, like here in the United States. We don't have universal health care, and instead we have this incredible patchwork of largely effective systems, some of which are, the state, some of which are federal, most of which are profit, and very few of which are actually attuned to helping people in a timely and effective way. And it's understandable that people would get angry when they say, "Oh, I've got symptoms," and then they find that if they want to go get tested, contrary to what they've been told, the tests are not going to be free. They're going to need to pay thousands of dollars, and then once actually, if they get results that they're positive, they're going to have to go through all these protocols. So, a person be angry about maybe so. Maybe they can take the beginnings of that, and then anger at a certain part. In the process, taper off and practical rationality takes over. That's the way the Stoics, I think, would say that it could be done instead of using anger as the fuel. Because the problem with anger is once you rely on it as your fuel or energy or dynamism, it goes off in all these other directions, and it latches onto things. It's dependable. So anger could give us the right orientation, but then we would need something other than anger to carry through the actions that we need to take. And we could also think about being angry at ourselves. John Cassian, again, to talk about a Christian monastic author, who's even probably more zero tolerance about anger than even the Stoics, says that the only person that you ever ought to get angry at is yourself, and you get angry at your own anger. Now, is that bad? Maybe sometimes it does make sense to feel angry, not in this that you would punish yourself, but in the sense that you're like, this is not who I'd like to be, and have sort of affect reaction towards that. But again, you wouldn't want to rely on that as being your sole driver. You would want to get to the point where something else is doing it, strengthening your faculty of reason, your faculty of choice. Yeah,
that reminds me of this. That's such a great. It's a good thought. Like this idea of only getting angry at yourself for the fact that you're still not improving your moral character to the point where you can not be angry, right? And it's not necessarily an anger, but it reminds me of this silly story that the personal development leader Jim Rohn used to say. And he was basically illustrating the point that sometimes you need a moment in your life where you can just go nuts and purge your anger and then get on with it, right? And he told this story of this guy who was just so fed up with his life. He had this crappy old car. He hated the car. It never worked. And he was like, what am I doing with my life? Why haven't I figured this stuff out yet? So he went outside. He just starts shooting his car up. He's like, I'm never driving this again. And that was the day that turned his life around, right? It's like, I'm sick of this. I'm done. I'm going to change my life. I wouldn't recommend going out and shooting up your car. But the demonstration is, listen, sometimes you just need to have a moment with yourself and say, listen, why haven't you improved your character yet? Why haven't you improved this about yourself? It's time. It's time to, move forward and make some progress, right?
And even if we move it into a different area that's more interpersonal, I mean, there are cases where somebody who's been put with bad behavior on other people's parts for quite a while, finally loses it, and they start yelling, and then people, whoa, I better take this seriously. And the danger there is that they then say, oh, well, see, getting angry got me what and so now I'm just going to get angry all the time. But having that moment of, let's call it, possible realignment, where things start to be able to shift out of a previously frozen thing, anger can be good for that. But then other things waiting as resources that you can use, because anger by itself isn't going to help you pick up all the pieces. It'll just keep making them more.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it won't get you a new car that you can drive around.
Yeah. But that's a brilliant point, which is, and you can definitely see this, and it's kind of like you see this with kids as well, when they learn that if they start to tantrum, they actually get what they want. And that's probably the worst thing that
Yeah.
you could possibly teach a kid. And I think that it's clear that a lot of people who maybe have had those situations when they were growing up, and it's just been ingrained into them that, yeah, when I get angry, I get what I want. And so there's got to be kind of a balance, right? There's got to be a balance between, okay, there's some sort of outcry here. Somebody wants me to hear something, so I should listen to this, but also
Yeah.
let's talk about it in a way that is more effective and going to move us forward instead of taking us 2 steps back.
And in sort of general idea, when we talk about virtues and vices, and we're doing virtue ethics, and Stoicism is an example of virtue ethics, as is Aristotelianism and Platonism, and various Christian approaches as well. There's a tendency to talk just about habits and not to look at other things that are very, very closely connected in real lives with the habits that we have. One of them is relationships. So, throwing a tantrum, not just me doing a thing in an environment that's, impersonal. It's me doing it in relation to you if you're a kid, and it can be transferred to other contexts. So I can do it with my teacher. I can do it with, I get to be a young. I can do it with my girlfriend. I don't get what I want from her, and I try it with professors, and all the way down the line, right? And so this relation aspect is just as important as the habit aspect. And then there's also what we can call the narrative aspect, which is where it's the story we tell ourselves. And so it's not enough just to like change what we typically do. We also have to look at the ways in which we're describing what's happening with ourselves. So when it comes to anger, generally the story that we're telling, I'm justified in this, extreme emotional response and the shouting and, maybe wrecking things or escalating for that. We have to look very, very carefully at those narratives as well. And I don't think the classic texts talk that much about that, but if we can adapt this just to modern times, I think we have to look at those 3 things as being connected: habit, relationships, and narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important, and the relationship side of things is just so important to look at, because you might be able to control your own anger, but if like you can't control the other person's anger, and if they're not on the same page as well, that becomes quite difficult, right? Because you're here trying to be like, okay, let's talk about this calmly, but they haven't yet reached that point. And
it brings up another really interesting issue, which is that anger can feed off of anger, right? So if you angry at me because I show up late and they talk to me in a way that I don't like, now I can be angry at you, and we're both already disagreement about who stood it and who's in the right and who's in the wrong. And now I start talking to you in an even more elevated voice, and I maybe throw an insult, and now ticked off at me about the original thing and about the insult, and it can go up further and further. And it's interesting. You see people who have legitimate grounds for anger quite often draw the attention and the ear of other people who are even worse off with respect to anger, who are more entitled and think that nobody else should be angry except for them. And I think this is what was happening in the political sphere right now.
Yeah, 100%. I think I've been watching a lot of news lately, not necessarily with anger in my heart, but with a genuine curiosity for how this world is going to play out over the next 1 to 10 years. And it's very interesting.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens, because there is a hive mentality of anger right now all around the world, and
I
who knows
think
where that goes.
I think that's quite true, and I think that the internet has made it worse in part because anger turns out to be one of the most viral of emotions, meaning that if you put something out there as a post and it provokes sadness or happiness, it's less likely to produce a reaction and reposting than anger is. because you can be angry on either side and then post it. Anger is a dynamic emotion as opposed to a static emotion. And you might also just post it to tick other people off. This whole phenomenon doing something to only whoever it is that you're provoking is part of that as well. So I think we're more at a disadvantage now, being as hyper connected as we are, which means that we need techniques even more. But we can't count on others having them. We live in an environment where if we decide to behave as Stoics or any other sort of intentional living, we can count 99% of the people around us to not see things that way.
Yeah. And it doesn't help that if most of your friends pretty much think the same as you, then all that you're going to see online is anger. And if all that you watch on YouTube and all that you search online is, NBC, latest news, or Fox News, latest news, it's like all you're going to see is angry news and reasons why you should be horrified with the world right now. And it's just going to keep on showing you more of that. And man, that's a dangerous road to go down. And because the internet is so new, and because social media is so new, we don't know the long-term effects of what's going to happen as a result of these algorithms that only show you what you regularly want to see. And so who knows where we go. Yeah. Well, Greg, this has been so much fun, and I appreciate you sharing all your wisdom here. I'm going to bring in everybody else into the conversation as well, see if they want to jump on and ask a question. All right, so there you have it, my interview with Gregory B Sadler. Now, you can find all of the information for where you can find him online in the show notes below, as well as the links to his incredible YouTube channel. So make sure you head there, check him out, show him some love, because he's got so much value to share beyond this interview. So I hope that you enjoyed that, and I hope that it was helpful to you, and I'll talk to you next time. But until then, I hope that this episode has helped you on your rise to the good life. Ciao. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Practical Stoic Podcast. If you'd like to stay up to date with the Practical Stoic community and everything to do with this podcast, then just go to my website, simonjedrew.com, and subscribe to the Practical Stoic Weekly, a newsletter that I send out every week with updates and all sorts of great Stoic insights. You can also find me everywhere online by searching Simon J. E. Drew. See you next time.